The mockery was a quiet thing, a currency of smirks and sidelong glances traded in the sterile corridors of forward operating base Boreas. Captain Eva Rostova felt it more than she heard it, a persistent hum of condescension aimed at the one piece of personal gear she wore, a battered, old-fashioned wristwatch. Its hands were frozen at 3:17. Its crystal face was a spiderweb of fine cracks, and its leather strap was worn to a pale, scarred gray. To the soldiers of this high-tech Arctic outpost, it was a joke, a relic worn by a records officer who seemed as out of place as her broken timepiece. They mocked her broken watch, until it activated a black ops beacon that would change everything they thought they knew about her, and the silent war being fought in the ice. Her arrival had been unceremonious. A standard transport flight, a brief and chilly welcome from a junior officer, and an assignment that felt like a deliberate insult. Organizing and digitizing 3 decades of paper-based supply chain records. She was a ghost at the periphery, a captain with no command, her presence a bureaucratic anomaly in a place built for hardened operators. She accepted the task with a placid nod, her expression revealing nothing. For 2 weeks, she worked in the sub-level storage facility, the only sounds the rustle of brittle paper and the rhythmic click of her keyboard. But she wasn't just archiving logistics. She was listening. She was watching. Every shift change, every patrol route, every flicker of the base's power grid was a piece of data logged and analyzed behind a calm, impassive gaze. The watch on her wrist remained inert, a silent testament to a past no one here could comprehend. It was a lock, and the world had not yet provided the key. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. Colonel Marcus Thorne considered himself a pragmatist. He valued efficiency, function, and the clear, unambiguous lines of authority that defined military life. Captain Rostova was an irritating smudge on that clarity. Her transfer orders were vague, citing a need for an interdepartmental liaison officer, a title that meant nothing in the frozen isolation of the Barents Sea. Her service record was a fortress of black redactions, leaving only the barest details of her rank and administrative qualifications. She was, in his professional opinion, deadweight. He found her in the mess hall during the midday meal, sitting alone at a small table in the corner. Her posture was perfect, her movements economical as she ate. She didn't read a datapad or engage in conversation. She simply observed the room, her eyes sweeping over the occupants with a quiet, unnerving intensity. Thorne strode over, his heavy boots echoing on the composite floor. "Captain," he said, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. Eva looked up, her expression neutral. "Colonel." His eyes flicked down to her wrist, landing on the broken watch. A faint smirk touched his lips. "Rostova, this is an active command. We rely on precision. Timetables, synchronized operations, punctuality. That thing," he gestured dismissively at the watch, "is an affectation. It suggests a certain carelessness. I suggest you acquire a timepiece that functions." The insult was deliberate, a public assertion of his dominance and her irrelevance. A few nearby soldiers, catching the exchange, stifled grins. Eva didn't flush or bristle. She simply looked at the watch, then back at him. Her voice, when she spoke, was level and calm. "It tells the time I need, sir," she replied. Thorne's jaw tightened. The quiet defiance, the refusal to be baited, was more infuriating than an outburst would have been. He saw a clerk, a paper pusher playing at being a soldier. He didn't see the years of training that had taught her to control her heart rate under fire, to make her face an unreadable mask. He saw a broken watch and assumed a broken officer. "See that you're on time for your duties, Captain. That's all." He turned and walked away, the matter settled in his mind. She was a problem to be managed, then forgotten. Eva watched him go, her gaze lingering for a moment before returning to her meal. The colonel saw a cracked piece of glass and motionless hands. He didn't see the micro-laminate solar cell layered beneath the crystal, perpetually charging. He didn't see the strontium, 90 petavoltaic battery designed for a 30-year lifespan in absolute darkness. He didn't see the biometric lock in the crown that authenticated her DNA through her skin's galvanic response. He saw a broken trinket. She knew it for what it was, a promise dormant and waiting. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. Her assigned task in the archives was a blessing. It gave her a legitimate reason to access the oldest parts of the base, the forgotten corners where the digital blueprints didn't quite match the physical reality. While she scanned manifests from the Cold War, her mind was mapping the present. The base was a state-of-the-art facility, but it was built on older foundations, and all structures have flaws. She noted the ventilation shafts, their grates secured with standard, easily defeated bolts. She measured the acoustic properties of the hallways, noting how sound carried from the command center to the barracks. From her terminal in the frigid archive room, she traced the schematics of the base's fiber optic network, locating the primary and secondary trunk lines. She discovered an old, decommissioned hardline running beneath the permafrost, a relic of a previous generation of technology, marked as inactive but still physically present. A potential vulnerability, or a potential asset. Her observations extended to the personnel. She saw how specialist AVs and communications chewed on his thumb when he was stressed, a sign he was likely to freeze under extreme pressure. She noticed that Sergeant Chun, leader of the perimeter security detail, always began her patrol route at the western gate, a predictable pattern born of habit. She recognized the swagger of the base's elite quick reaction force as a mask for boredom. They were warriors with no war to fight, their skills dulled by routine. Each day, she would take a mandated 1-hour constitutional around the inner perimeter. The other soldiers saw a clerk getting some fresh air. They didn't see her testing the ground for vibration sensitivity, gauging the effective range of the motion sensors, or noting the precise blind spots where the overlapping fields of the security cameras failed to converge. She memorized the precise timing of the radar sweeps, the faint electronic hum that preceded each pass. One afternoon, standing at the edge of the clear perimeter, she looked out at the vast, blinding expanse of white. The wind was a physical force, sculpting the snow into sharp, unforgiving ridges. To most, it was a desolate wasteland. To her, it was terrain. It had contours, concealment, and avenues of approach. She held up her wrist, angling the watch. The cracked face caught the low-hanging Arctic sun, scattering the light in 1,000 directions. It looked useless, a piece of junk reflecting a meaningless glare. But for a fraction of a second, the light aligned with a specific set of cracks, channeling a pinpoint of light toward a distant, frozen peak. It was a test. A calibration. She was checking her tools, ensuring they were ready. The base was a system, and she was learning its language, its weaknesses, and its rhythms, waiting for the moment when she would need to speak. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. The pressure arrived not as an enemy force, but as the weather turning on itself. An atmospheric river, a phenomenon unheard of in the high Arctic, slammed into the region. The storm that followed was a monster of blinding snow and hurricane-force winds. Within an hour, FOB Boreas was an island in a sea of white fury. Visibility dropped to zero. The temperature plummeted to a point where exposed metal became a searing hazard. The first casualty was the main communications satellite dish. A gust of wind, laden with ice crystals as hard as sand, tore it from its mountings with a scream of tortured steel. Alarms blared through the base. Colonel Thorne stood in the command center, a cavern of flickering screens and anxious voices, his face a grim mask. "Give me the backup array online," he barked at the communications chief. Now, Specialist Davies, his thumb already in his mouth, frantically worked his console. "Sir, I'm trying. The storm is causing massive interference. The VLF antenna isn't getting a signal out, and the secondary dish is, sir, it's not responding. The control linkage is dead." Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle the air. They were blind, deaf, and alone. Thorne gripped the edge of a console, his knuckles white. "What about hardline?" "Negative, sir. All civilian lines went down an hour ago. We are completely isolated." It was then that the next alarm sounded, a low, pulsing klaxon that signified a perimeter breach sensor. Sergeant Chin's voice crackled over the local comms. distorted by the storm. Command S3. We have multiple proximity alerts along the eastern fence line. Can't be wildlife. Not in this. Requesting QRF deployment to investigate. You can't see 5 feet out there, Sergeant. Thorne snapped. Hold your position. On a secondary screen, a tactical plot tried to make sense of the data. It wasn't a single entity. It was a cluster of contacts, moving with unnatural speed and coordination, using the storm's electronic noise as a cloak. They weren't just at the fence. They were probing it, testing for weak points. "What the hell is that?" a lieutenant muttered, staring at the screen. "They're not human. The movement patterns are too erratic, too fast." The command center, once a model of military order, was descending into controlled chaos. Voices overlapped on the comms. Technicians shouted conflicting reports. The pressure was building, threatening to crack the base's composure as surely as the wind had cracked its comms tower. Through it all, Eva Rostova stood near the entrance to the center, having been drawn by the alarms. She hadn't been summoned. She wasn't part of the command staff. But she was there, her expression as calm and still as the eye of the storm that raged outside. She was no longer observing. She was assessing. ####. While Thorne and his staff were trapped in a loop of identifying problems, Eva was already moving toward a solution. She didn't announce her intentions or ask for permission. Authority was a luxury they could no longer afford. She walked with purpose past the frantic officers, her steps silent and sure, and stopped at an auxiliary engineering console that had been overlooked in the panic. Specialist Davies was hyperventilating nearby, his attempts to reboot the system failing repeatedly. "It's a hardware fault," Eva said, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. Davies jumped, startled. "What? Who, Captain? We don't know that. It could be anything. A software glitch, a cascading power failure." Eva ignored him. Her fingers moved over the holographic interface, not with the frantic tapping of a desperate operator, but with the precision of a surgeon. She bypassed the standard user interface, pulling up the raw system diagnostics. A waterfall of code filled the screen. Her eyes scanned the data, filtering out gigabytes of irrelevant error messages. She wasn't looking for what was broken. She was looking for what was still working, for the faintest signal in the noise. "The control linkage isn't dead," she stated, her focus absolute. "The primary data conduit is severed, but the diagnostic microchannel is still open. It's cycling a handshake request every 12 seconds. She pointed to a single, repeating line of hexadecimal code. There, she cross-referenced the signal's latency with the base's physical wiring schematics, the one she had memorized from the archives. The calculations happened in her head, faster than any of the command center's tactical computers were currently managing. "The signal is terminating here," she said, touching a point on a 3D rendering of the exterior comms tower. 70 meters up. Junction Box 7 Gamma. The atmospheric ionizer has overloaded, frying the primary signal isolator. The backup is on the same circuit. It's a design flaw. She turned to a stunned maintenance technician who was gaping at her. "Get a shielded isolator from sub-level storage. Manifest number 44, B9. You'll need a climber's harness and a de-icing kit. The housing will be frozen solid. You have a 20-minute window between the primary and secondary radar sweeps. Use it. Go." Her orders were not a request. They were a statement of fact, delivered with an authority that was absolute and undeniable. The technician, who moments before had been looking to the panicked colonel for guidance, simply nodded and ran. Thorne had watched the entire exchange, his mouth slightly agape. A records clerk had just diagnosed a catastrophic hardware failure from a secondary console and dispatched a repair team with tactical precision in under 60 seconds. She had done it without shouting, without fanfare, and without once looking to him for approval. She simply acted. The quiet captain from the archives was suddenly the most competent person in the room, and no one, least of all Thorne, knew why. ####. A profound and unsettling silence fell over the command center in Eva's wake. The shouting ceased. The frantic energy dissipated, replaced by a collective, stunned stillness. Every eye was now on the unassuming captain, who was calmly wiping her hands on her fatigues as if she had just finished a routine piece of paperwork. The technician was gone, the mission to the tower underway, and the command staff was left to recalibrate their entire understanding of the woman they had dismissed as a glorified clerk. Colonel Thorne was the first to recover. He walked slowly toward her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning suspicion. The smirk was gone, replaced by a hard, analytical stare. "Captain Rostova," he began, his voice dangerously level. "Explain yourself. What did you learn comms, engineering, diagnostics at that level?" "I read the manuals, sir," she replied, her voice flat, offering nothing. It was the truth, but not the whole truth, and its simplicity was a form of defiance. "You read the manuals," Thorne repeated slowly, tasting the absurdity of the statement. "You diagnosed a fried isolator 70 meters up a tower in the middle of a blizzard by reading the manuals?" Before Eva could answer, Sergeant Chin's voice, tight with urgency, crackled over the local comms again. "Command S3, those contacts are on the move. They're using the fence itself as a conduit, bypassing the ground sensors. They're not trying to cut through, they're climbing over. And they're fast. Whatever they are, they're not human." The new threat immediately overshadowed Thorne's interrogation. He turned back to the tactical plot. The red icons representing the unknowns were swarming a single section of the perimeter, moving with a fluid, insect-like purpose. "QRF status," Thorne demanded. "Sir, we're suited up, but we can't get a target lock with our helmet optics. The snow and electronic noise are blinding the system," came the reply. "We be firing blind." The room was once again thick with tension. They were being invaded, and their high-tech solutions were failing them. It was in that moment of renewed crisis that Thorne made a decision. His instincts, honed by decades of command, told him that the woman standing silently behind him was more than she appeared. His curiosity had become a desperate need. He turned back to Eva, his gaze intense. "You, Captain," he said, pointing a finger at her. "You seem to have a perspective the rest of us are lacking. What do you see?" It wasn't an order. It was a concession. It was the first time anyone at FOB Boreas had asked for her opinion on anything more important than a filing cabinet. Eva's eyes moved from Thorne's face to the tactical screen. She studied the pattern of the invading contacts, her mind processing the data not as a threat, but as a problem with a solvable equation. The shift in the room was palpable. Mockery had evaporated. Dismissal had curdled into suspicion. Now, a fragile, desperate curiosity was taking its place. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. Eva stepped forward, her focus entirely on the tactical display. The red icons pulsed, their movements not random, but disturbingly methodical. They were avoiding the known sensor towers and staying low, exploiting the ground clutter created by the blizzard. "They're not soldiers," Eva said, her voice quiet yet carrying across the now silent room. "They're automated. Drones. Small, quadrupedal, designed for stealth and electronic warfare. Their purpose isn't to attack. It's to map our network vulnerabilities and plant a logic bomb in our local grid." A wave of murmurs went through the staff. "How can you possibly know that?" the lieutenant from before asked, his voice a mix of skepticism and awe. Eva pointed to the screen. "Their movement. See how they pause in unison every 30 seconds? They're sharing data, triangulating their positions relative to the base's internal power junctions. And they're using the static from the storm as a broadcast medium. It's a classic infiltration pattern for a Stalker-class drone swarm." Colonel Thorne stared at her. "A Stalker-class drone? That's not a designation in any NATO database I've ever seen." "It wouldn't be," Eva replied without looking at him. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, formulating a response. "Sir, your quick reaction force is equipped with standard pulse rifles. Their targeting systems are optical and laser-based. They're useless in these conditions. The drones are navigating by millimeter-wave radar, which penetrates the snow. We can't see them, but they can see us perfectly." The situation seemed impossible. They were being dissected by an invisible enemy, and their primary defense force was blind. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy with the weight of their own helplessness. Thorn looked at the men and women of his command, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. Then he looked back at Eva, who remained a pillar of calm certainty. "All right, Captain," Thorn said, his voice surrendering the last vestiges of his authority to her expertise. "You've identified the problem. Now give me a solution." This was the true test. Fixing a broken antenna was one thing. Defeating a technologically superior, unseen enemy in impossible conditions was another. Eva's gaze remained fixed on the screen for a moment longer before she turned to face him. "We can't fight their technology, so we have to use it against them," she said. "These drones operate on a hive mind protocol. They share sensory data to build a complete picture of the battle space. If we can feed them a false picture, we can lure them into a trap." She walked to the engineering console she had used before. The base's primary generator emits a specific electromagnetic frequency. It's shielded, but there's always leakage. The drones will be using that as a homing point, a steady signal in the storm. We need to create a ghost signal, a much stronger one, from a different location. She looked at Sergeant Chun through the command center's comms link screen. "Sergeant, what's that grid coordinate Echo 79er, just outside the perimeter?" Chun, taken aback, quickly consulted her datapad. Nothing, ma'am. Just a maintenance depot for the snow-clearing equipment." "It's empty." "Perfect," Eva said. "It has a high-voltage charging station. We're going to overload it. We'll make it scream in the EM spectrum. The drone's hive protocol will prioritize the more powerful signal, identifying it as the base's primary power core. They'll converge on it, thinking they've found the heart of the network. And when they do," Thorn pressed. Eva's eyes were cold, her expression utterly serious. "The depot is filled with charging capacitors and volatile hydrocells for the plows. When we overload the system, it won't just create a signal. It will create a very large, very powerful thermobaric explosion. ####. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. It relied on a deep, almost intimate knowledge of enemy technology that no one in the room possessed, except for her. For a long moment, Colonel Thorn just stared at Eva, processing the cold, brutal calculus of her strategy. He was being asked to trust the fate of his base to a woman whose file was a black hole and whose primary qualification seemed to be sorting paperwork. He weighed the certainty of being overrun by an enemy he couldn't fight against the slim possibility that this strange, quiet captain knew exactly what she was doing. "Do it," he said, his voice a low growl. The decision was made. Eva's focus became absolute. She wasn't a captain anymore. She was an operator. "Specialist Davies," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for hesitation. Davies, his fear now replaced by a rapt focus on her, snapped to attention. "I need you to reroute all non-essential power to the Echo 79er charging station. Use the decommissioned Cold War conduit I identified earlier. It's unshielded and will carry the surge without tripping the main grid's safety breakers." Davies's eyes widened. "The old conduit? But it's not on the main schematic." "It is on the old ones," Eva countered. "Now do it." She then turned to the QRF leader. "Lieutenant, I need your team to set up a firing line with a clear view of the depot. When the drones converge, they'll be silhouetted by the energy surge just before it blows. You'll have a 2-second window. Anything that isn't vaporized, I want you to eliminate." The orders were complex, but she delivered them with such clarity and confidence that they were acted upon without question. The chain of command had been unofficially, seamlessly transferred. As Davies rerouted power, a massive drain caused the lights in the command center to flicker and dim. The hum of the base's systems dropped to a low groan. On the tactical map, the effect was almost instantaneous. The red icons, which had been methodically probing the main compound, stopped. They hesitated for a moment, and then, as one, they turned and began racing toward the new, powerful ghost signal. "They've taken the bait," Sergeant Chin reported, her voice filled with disbelief. "They're heading right for the depot." A tense hush fell over the room as everyone watched the icons converge on a single point on the map. Eva stood before the engineering console, her hand poised over a virtual execution command. QRF in position, the lieutenant's voice crackled. Now, Thorne breathed, his eyes locked on Eva. Eva's finger tapped the screen. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the power grid screamed as the surge hit the old station. On the external cameras that were still functional, the night lit up. A blinding blue-white arc of energy erupted from the maintenance depot, turning the swirling snow into a dazzling halo. The drones, caught in the open, were thrown into sharp relief, spidery, metallic creatures, frozen for an instant against the glare. Then the depot detonated. A wave of silent, white light washed out the camera feeds, followed a second later by a deep, percussive thump that vibrated through the concrete floor of the command center. On the tactical map, every single red icon vanished. Just as the aftershock faded, the base's main power, no longer being drained, surged back to life. The lights returned to full strength. On a monitor, a green icon flashed, secondary comms array, online. The technician on the tower had succeeded. A secure channel, one that was hard-coded into the base's deepest systems and unknown to even Thorne, flickered to life on his command screen. It was a failsafe triggered by the unique energy signature of the overload. A single, encrypted text string appeared for 5 seconds before erasing itself. Beacon active. Call sign Ghost. Stand by for exfil. Thorne read the words, his blood running cold. Ghost, a name whispered only in the highest echelons of intelligence, a legend attached to missions that officially never happened. He slowly turned his head, his eyes finding Eva Rostova. She was standing calmly, her hand resting on her wrist. She deliberately twisted the crown of her broken watch. With a faint click, the hands, frozen for so long at 3:17, moved to 12 o'clock. The beacon was now fully active. Thorne stumbled over to his terminal and used his highest security clearance, typing in a call sign. Access granted. A single file appeared. It was Eva Rostova's. The redactions were gone. He saw a list of operations that made the hair on his arm stand up. Solo infiltrations, counter-espionage, high-value target neutralizations across 3 continents. She wasn't a records clerk. She was one of the most dangerous covert operatives in the world, hidden in plain sight. He finally understood. Her assignment here wasn't a bureaucratic error. FOB Boreas hadn't been a backwater posting for her. It had been her designated hibernation den. And something had just woken her up. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. The storm broke with the dawn. Pale, watery sunlight spilled over the horizon, illuminating a world scoured clean and silent. The wind had died, and an almost sacred peace settled over the Arctic landscape. On the newly cleared runway, the snowplows had finished their work, their movements efficient and purposeful, as if trying to erase the chaos of the night. There was a new tension in the air, but it was not one of fear. It was one of awe. A new sound began to fill the sky, a low, tearing hum that was unlike any conventional aircraft. A sleek, matte-black transport, more of a blade than a plane, descended from the stratosphere, its delta wings cutting through the thin air without a sonic boom. It landed with unnatural grace, its engines emitting a barely audible whine before falling silent. There were no markings on its fuselage, no flag, no insignia. It was as anonymous and deadly as the woman it had come to collect. The main ramp lowered. A small team of 4 operators disembarked, clad in gray tactical gear and carrying weapons that Thorne didn't recognize. They moved with a predatory economy of motion. Leading them was a man with the stars of a general on his collar, his face a roadmap of old scars and grim decisions. Colonel Thorne met them on the tarmac, his command staff a few paces behind him. The general's eyes, chips of ice, swept over Thorne without interest, scanning the area until they found Eva. She was walking toward them from the main hangar, carrying a single small pack. She wore a fresh uniform, but on her wrist was the same battered watch. The general ignored Thorne completely, his entire focus on Eva. He gave her a short, sharp nod, a gesture of profound respect between peers. "Ghost," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Time to come in." "I'm ready," Eva replied. Thorn felt a flush of shame creep up his neck. He remembered his petty condescension, his dismissal of her, his joke about her watch. He had so completely misjudged her that the memory was a physical weight. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. The general finally acknowledged him with a glance. But Thorn's attention was on Eva. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and executed the sharpest, most sincere salute of his entire 30-year career. It was more than protocol. It was an apology, an admission of his own blindness, and a mark of newfound, absolute respect. "Captain Rostova," he said, his voice clear and steady in the cold air. "Your watch. It seems you were right. It's right on time." A few of the junior soldiers who had witnessed the exchange in a mess hall were watching from a distance. They saw the colonel's salute, saw the fearsome general's deference, and stood a little straighter, their own mockery now a source of deep embarrassment. Eva met Thorn's eyes and gave him a brief, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. It was enough. ####. Eva turned and ascended the ramp into the dark interior of the transport. The general and his team followed, the ramp hissing shut behind them, sealing them inside. The strange, quiet hum of the engines returned, and the craft lifted off the runway, rising vertically for 100 meters before angling sharply upward and accelerating at an impossible speed. Within seconds, it was just a dark speck against the pale blue Arctic sky, and then it was gone. Colonel Thorn stood on the tarmac long after the aircraft had vanished, his hands still tingling from the force of his salute. He felt as though a force of nature had passed through his command, fundamentally and permanently altering its landscape. He had been so certain of his world, of its rules and hierarchies, and she had shattered that certainty with quiet competence. He returned to the command center. The screens were all green. The damage reports were coming in, but they were manageable. The base was secure. On his main console, the spot where the encrypted message had appeared was blank, as if it had never been there. But he would never forget it. Call sign Ghost. He looked out the reinforced window at the vast, empty horizon. The Arctic was a place of hidden things, of immense power lying dormant under a placid surface. Eva Rostova had been the same. He thought of her broken watch and finally understood its true meaning. It wasn't a measure of the passing of hours and minutes. It was a key, a status indicator for a life lived outside of time, in the shadows between seconds. Its stillness hadn't signified that it was broken. It had signified that its owner was at peace. Its movement meant the world was in trouble. The image lingered in his mind. The quiet woman, the damaged timepiece, and the terrible, hidden power they represented. Her dignity had been her shield, and her earned respect was now her legacy at FOB Boreas, a silent testament to the fact that the most dangerous weapon is the one you never see coming.